Bex. Picture this. You're sitting across from someone who's supposed to evaluate your 8 years of hard work, your dedication, your professional growth, but instead of an impartial reviewer, you're looking at your ex-husband's new wife, someone who married him 3 months after your divorce papers were signed. She's got that satisfied smirk on her face, like she's about to deliver the most devastating news of your life, and you realize this isn't about your performance at all. This is personal revenge, dressed up in corporate clothing. That was my reality 6 months ago, and what happened next changed everything. Not just for me, but for how I understood my own worth in a world that had been systematically undervaluing me for years. My name is Jessica Martinez, and this is the story of how my ex-husband's vindictive plan backfired so spectacularly that it launched me into the career breakthrough I'd been working toward my entire adult life. You see, Brad thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. He thought getting his new wife, Amanda, hired as my performance reviewer would be the perfect way to sabotage the promotion I'd been chasing for years. What he didn't realize was that I had been quietly building something at Phoenix Digital Marketing that would make his little revenge scheme look like child's play. I had documentation, evidence, and leverage that I'd been too modest to use until someone pushed me too far. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My story begins 8 years ago, fresh out of Arizona State University, with a marketing degree and dreams bigger than my bank account. Phoenix was scorching that summer, the kind of heat that makes you question every life choice that brought you to the desert. But I was 27 years old, and convinced that if I worked hard enough, talent would speak for itself. How naive I was back then, thinking merit was all that mattered in the corporate world. I remember walking into Phoenix Digital Marketing for my first day, wearing a blazer I'd bought on clearance, and carrying a notebook filled with ideas I was sure would revolutionize how they approached client campaigns. The office was sleek, all glass and chrome, with motivational posters about innovation and teamwork scattered throughout the open floor plan. It felt like stepping into my future, a place where my analytical mind and creative instincts could finally work together to build something meaningful. Brad and I had been together for 2 years by then. We'd met during our senior year of college, and while I was laser-focused on graduating summa cum laude and landing a job that would launch my career, Brad was still in that extended adolescence phase that some guys never quite grow out of. He was charming, funny, the kind of person who could walk into any room and immediately become the center of attention. I was drawn to that confidence, that ease with people that felt so different from my own more reserved nature. While I was pulling 60-hour weeks, learning the intricacies of digital advertising, client relationship management, and data analytics, Brad was bouncing between jobs like a pinball. First it was sales at a furniture store, then customer service at a tech startup, then a brief stint trying to become a personal trainer. Each job came with a new passion, a new vision for his future, and each one lasted about 6 months before he decided it wasn't quite the right fit. I didn't mind being the primary breadwinner during those early years. Love makes you generous with your resources and your patience, and I genuinely believed we were building something together. Our little apartment near downtown Phoenix wasn't much, barely 800 square feet with thin walls and a temperamental air conditioning unit, but it was ours. I'd come home exhausted from long days at the office, and Brad would have dinner waiting, some new recipe he'd discovered on YouTube during his job search. Those first months at Phoenix Digital were intoxicating in their intensity. I was assigned to the junior account coordinator role, which essentially meant I was the person who handled all the detail work that senior account managers didn't want to deal with. Spreadsheets, status reports, client check-ins, invoice tracking, the unsexy backbone work that keeps campaigns running smoothly. But I approached every task like it was the most important project in the company's history. I remember staying late one night, maybe 2 months into the job, trying to figure out why one of our major retail clients was seeing declining engagement rates despite increased ad spend. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew and the hum of computers that never really sleep. I had spreadsheets open across 3 monitors, cross-referencing demographic data with engagement metrics, looking for patterns that everyone else had missed. That's when I discovered something that would become the foundation of my entire career approach. Our targeting algorithms were missing a crucial demographic shift. Women aged 25 to 34 were changing their online shopping behaviors in response to economic uncertainty, but our campaigns were still targeting them as if it were 20. I spent the entire night rebuilding the campaign parameters, creating new audience segments, and developing a predictive model that could adapt to changing consumer behaviors in real time. The next morning, I walked into my supervisor's office with a presentation that outlined not just the problem, but a comprehensive solution that could be applied across all our retail clients. Sarah Chen, my direct manager at the time, looked at my analysis with the kind of surprise that told me I'd been significantly underestimated. Within a week, my modified campaign strategy had increased engagement by 37% and reduced cost per acquisition by 22%. But here's what I learned about corporate recognition. Individual brilliance gets absorbed into team success, and team success gets credited to whoever has the most senior title in the room. The client loved the results. Sarah got praised for effective team management, and I got a pat on the head and a reminder that this is exactly the kind of initiative they like to see from junior staff. Meanwhile, at home, Brad was starting to show signs of frustration with his own career trajectory. He'd watch me get excited about campaign performance metrics or new client acquisitions, and I could see something shift in his expression. It wasn't quite resentment yet, but it was the beginning of something that would eventually eat away at our relationship like acid on metal. "You're obsessed with that place," he'd say when I'd work late or bring projects home on weekends. "There's more to life than spreadsheets and conversion rates." He wasn't wrong that I was passionate about my work, but he was wrong about why. It wasn't obsession. It was recognition that I'd found something I was genuinely good at, something that felt like it could grow into the career I'd always imagined for myself. Every successful campaign, every satisfied client, every problem I solved felt like proof that I belonged in this world, that I had something valuable to contribute. By the end of my first year, I'd been promoted to account coordinator, which came with a modest salary increase and slightly more interesting responsibilities. I was now the primary point of contact for 3 mid-tier clients, responsible for campaign strategy, performance analysis, and relationship management. Brad had settled into a customer service role at a local credit union, work that paid the bills but didn't exactly set his soul on fire. The dynamic between us was shifting in ways that neither of us fully acknowledged at the time. I was growing more confident in my professional abilities, more articulate about industry trends, more connected to a network of colleagues who respected my insight. Brad was feeling stuck, watching his college friends advance in their careers, while he continued to search for something that felt like his true calling. Our conversations began to center around my work more than his, partly because I always had new challenges and victories to share, and partly because he seemed increasingly reluctant to discuss his own professional situation. When he did talk about work, it was usually to complain about his boss, his coworkers, or the limitations of his current role. I tried to be supportive, offering suggestions and encouragement, but I could feel him withdrawing from those conversations. The real turning point came during my second year at Phoenix Digital. I'd been working with one of our technology clients, a medium-sized software company that was struggling to reach their target demographic of small business owners. Their previous campaigns had been generic, broad-spectrum approaches that generated awareness, but failed to drive meaningful conversions. I spent weeks studying their product offerings, researching their competitors, and analyzing the pain points of their potential customer. What I discovered was that small business owners weren't responding to traditional B2B marketing approaches because they didn't see themselves as business executives. They saw themselves as craftspeople, service providers, entrepreneurs who needed tools that would help them focus on what they loved rather than administrative tasks they found overwhelming. Our client's software was actually perfect for this audience, but we were talking to them in the wrong language. I developed a campaign strategy that told stories instead of listing features, that focused on transformation rather than capability, that spoke to the dreams and frustrations of people who had started their own businesses because they wanted freedom and creativity, not because they wanted to become corporate executive. The campaign materials featured real small business owners, talking about how technology had given them back time to focus on their passion projects, their families, their communities. The results were extraordinary. Lead generation increased by 84%, qualified conversions went up by 61%, and customer acquisition costs dropped by 33%. More importantly, the client started receiving feedback from new customers, saying that our campaigns were the first marketing materials that had ever made them feel truly understood. This success led to my first real recognition within the company. Robert Chen, our CEO, called me into his office to personally thank me for the work I'd done. He asked me to present my strategy to the entire senior leadership team, to explain my research methodology and campaign development process so that other account managers could learn from my approach. I remember that presentation like it was yesterday, standing in the main conference room, looking out at 12 senior executives, most of them men with decades more experience than me, explaining how I'd identified an overlooked market segment and developed messaging that resonated with their actual needs rather than their perceived characteristics. For the first time in my career, I felt like I was being seen as a strategic thinker rather than just a reliable executive. Robert introduced me to the leadership team as one of our rising stars and mentioned that they were considering creating a new role focused specifically on data-driven campaign development. It wasn't a promise, but it was the first indication that my contributions were being noticed at the highest levels of the company. When I came home that night, practically floating with excitement about the presentation and the possibility of advancement, Brad's response was lukewarm at best. "That's great, babe," he said, but his attention was focused on the television, some sports commentary show that seemed more engaging to him than my career breakthrough. Later, when I tried to explain the significance of presenting to the leadership team, he said something that should have been a warning sign, but that I dismissed as momentary frustration. "I'm happy for you, but you know that..." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They're just gonna give that new position to some guy anyway. That's how these corporate places work. At the time, I thought he was being protective, trying to manage my expectations so I wouldn't be disappointed if things didn't work out the way I hoped. I didn't recognize it as the first sign that he was more comfortable with me being undervalued than he was with me succeeding beyond his own achievements. The months that followed were a whirlwind of increased responsibilities and growing recognition. I was assigned to more high-profile clients, invited to strategy meetings that had previously been above my pay grade, and asked to contribute to company-wide initiatives that went far beyond my official job description. I was working longer hours, but they felt energizing rather than exhausting because every day brought new challenges and opportunities to prove what I was capable of. I started developing what would eventually become my signature approach to campaign development: intensive research phases, where I would immerse myself in the client's industry, their competitors, and most importantly, their customers' actual behaviors and motivation. I built relationships with industry analysts, subscribed to niche publications, attended webinars and conferences on my own time, anything that would help me understand the broader context in which our clients operate. This wasn't just about being thorough, it was about recognizing that effective marketing requires genuine empathy for the people you're trying to reach. Too many campaigns failed because they were based on assumptions about what customers wanted, rather than evidence of what customers actually need. I became obsessive about gathering real data, conducting actual research, and testing my hypotheses before committing significant budget to campaign execution. Client after client saw measurable improvements in their campaign performance, and word was starting to spread throughout the industry that Phoenix Digital had someone who could deliver results that other agencies couldn't match. I was building a reputation slowly but steadily as someone who combined analytical rigor with creative insight in ways that translated directly to business success. But success in a professional context doesn't always translate to harmony in a personal relationship, especially when one partner's growth highlights the other partner's stagnation. Brad was becoming increasingly critical of what he called my workaholic tendencies, though I noticed he had no complaints about the financial benefits of my advancement. My salary had increased significantly, our apartment had gotten nicer, we were able to afford better vacations and dining experiences, but he seemed to resent the source of our improved lifestyle even as he enjoyed its benefit. The real tension came when I started networking more seriously within the marketing industry. Phoenix has a surprisingly vibrant marketing community with regular meetups, conferences, and informal gatherings where professionals share insights and build relationships. I began attending these events, not just as a representative of Phoenix Digital, but as someone who was developing her own reputation and professional identity. Brad would sometimes join me at these industry events, and I could see him struggling with the dynamic. People would recognize my name, ask about campaigns I'd worked on, seek my opinion on industry trends. He would stand beside me, charming and personable as always, but clearly uncomfortable with being introduced as Jessica's boyfriend, rather than being the center of attention himself. "Everyone at those events treats you like you're some kind of guru," he said after one particularly successful networking event, where I'd been approached by 3 different companies about potential job opportunities. "It's just marketing, babe. You're not curing cancer." His comment stung because it revealed something I'd been trying not to acknowledge. He didn't take my work seriously. To him, my success was just good luck or timing, not the result of genuine skill and dedication. He saw my growing reputation as something that was happening to me rather than something I was actively building through my choices and efforts. But I was building something, piece by piece, client by client, campaign by campaign. I was developing expertise that extended far beyond my official job responsibilities, creating value that went well beyond what Phoenix Digital was paying me, and establishing relationships that were becoming the foundation of a career that could eventually exist independently of any single company. I just didn't realize yet how much leverage I was accumulating, or how dramatically that leverage would change everything when I finally understood my own worth in the market. The 3rd year at Phoenix Digital brought changes that would reshape not only my career trajectory but also expose the fault lines in my relationship with Brad that I'd been unconsciously ignoring. The company was expanding rapidly, securing larger clients and more complex campaigns, which meant new hiring and restructuring that would test everyone's place in the evolving hierarchy. Brad had finally found what seemed like steady employment at Morrison Financial, a mid-sized investment firm where he'd landed a position in their client relations department. For the first time in our relationship, he appeared genuinely excited about his work, talking enthusiastically about learning the financial services industry and building relationships with high-net-worth clients. I was thrilled to see him engaged and optimistic, hoping this would ease the tension that had been building between us as my own career accelerated. What I didn't anticipate was how differently our respective workplaces would treat ambition and advancement. While I was still grinding through detailed analysis and proving my worth through measurable results, Brad's natural charisma was opening doors in ways that seemed almost effortless. Within 6 months, he was being invited to client dinners, golf outings, and informal strategy sessions with senior partners. The financial industry, it seemed, still operated on relationship building and personal connections in ways that felt antiquated compared to the data-driven environment I was navigating. At Phoenix Digital, I watched male colleagues receive opportunities that seemed disproportionate to their actual contributions. Take Marcus Williams, who had been hired as a senior account manager around the same time I'd been promoted to account coordinator. Marcus was undeniably charismatic, the kind of person who could walk into a client meeting and immediately establish rapport with everyone in the room. He had an MBA from a respectable program and spoke confidently about strategic vision and market positioning. But when it came to actual campaign execution, Marcus consistently relied on other team members to handle the analytical work, the detailed research, and the performance optimization that determined whether campaigns succeeded or failed. He was excellent at presenting results and managing client relationships, but the strategies he presented were often developed by people like me who remained behind the scenes while he took credit for the overall success. The disparity became most obvious during our quarterly client review. Marcus would present campaign performance with the kind of polished confidence that impressed both clients and senior management, while I would sit in the background, having prepared most of the analysis and strategic recommendations he was discussing. Clients loved his energy and vision, partners appreciated his big-picture thinking, and he was quickly being positioned for advancement to senior leadership roles. Meanwhile, my own presentations were consistently praised for their thoroughness and insight, but I was still being categorized as detail-oriented and analytically strong rather than leadership material. Robert Chen would compliment my research methodology and strategic thinking, But somehow these acknowledgments never translated into the kind of visibility and advancement opportunities that Marcus seemed to attract naturally. The difference in treatment became particularly stark during client acquisition pitches. When potential clients visited our offices, Marcus was always included in the initial meetings, positioned as someone who understood their strategic challenges and could envision creative solutions. I was brought in later, during technical discussions about implementation and measurement, essentially cast as the person who would figure out how to execute whatever vision Marcus had articulated. This dynamic was frustrating, but I convinced myself it was temporary, that consistent results would eventually speak louder than presentation skill. I focused on becoming indispensable through expertise, developing specialized knowledge in emerging areas like marketing automation and predictive analytics that few other people in the company truly understood. The irony was that while I was becoming more valuable to Phoenix Digital's actual operations, I was becoming less visible in the contexts where advancement decisions were made. Senior leadership saw Marcus as someone who could represent the company to high-level clients and industry partners, while they saw me as someone who made sure the work got done correctly behind the scenes. Brad, observing this dynamic from his own very different professional environment, began offering advice that revealed how little he understood about my situation. "You need to be more like Marcus," he would say after I'd describe a particularly frustrating meeting where my contributions had been overlooked. "People want to work with someone who makes them feel confident and excited, not someone who overwhelms them with data." His suggestions felt like criticism rather than support, implying that my approach was somehow flawed rather than simply undervalued. He would encourage me to be more social at office events, to speak up more in meetings, to present my ideas with more conviction and less qualification. While some of this advice wasn't wrong, it missed the fundamental reality that women in corporate environments face different standards and expectations than men do. When Marcus spoke confidently about strategic vision, he was seen as leadership material. When I did the same thing, I was sometimes perceived as overstepping my role or being too aggressive. When Marcus delegated analytical work to junior staff, he was demonstrating effective management skills. When I asked for support with research or data analysis, it was sometimes interpreted as lacking independence or initiative. These double standards were subtle enough that they could be dismissed as misperception or oversensitivity, but consistent enough that they created a systematic barrier to advancement that had nothing to do with actual performance or capability. I was working longer hours delivering better results and developing more specialized expertise than many of my male colleagues, but I was being rewarded with more responsibility rather than more authority. The frustration reached a breaking point during what should have been a career highlight. I had spent months developing a comprehensive digital transformation strategy for Pinnacle Manufacturing, one of our largest potential clients. The proposal involved not just advertising campaigns, but a complete overhaul of their customer acquisition and retention system, including marketing automation, customer relationship management, and predictive analytics that could help them anticipate market changes and adjust their strategies accordingly. I had researched their industry extensively, analyzed their competitors' digital strategies, and created detailed implementation timelines with measurable milestones and ROI projection. The proposal represented months of work and contained innovations that could differentiate Phoenix Digital from every other agency competing for their business. When the final presentation was scheduled, I assumed I would be leading the strategic discussion, given that I had developed the entire approach and understood its implications better than anyone else in the company. Instead, Robert assigned Marcus to present the overall vision while I was asked to handle the technical implementation details, essentially being positioned as the person who would execute Marcus's strategy rather than the architect of the entire proposal. The presentation went exceptionally well, with Pinnacle's executives responding enthusiastically to both the strategic vision and the detailed implementation plan. They were particularly impressed by the integration of predictive analytics and marketing automation, areas where my expertise was clearly superior to anything their previous agencies had offered. We won the account, securing a contract worth over $2 million annually. At the celebration dinner, Robert toasted Marcus for his visionary thinking and exceptional client relationship skills, while acknowledging my invaluable support and technical expertise. The language was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus was being credited with leadership while I was being thanked for execution, despite having created the strategy that won the business. The evening became even more frustrating when several colleagues approached me privately to acknowledge that they knew I had developed the winning strategy. "Everyone knows you're the brains behind these campaigns," Sarah Chen told me during a quiet moment at the bar. "Your research and strategic thinking are what make us competitive. If everyone knew, why wasn't it being acknowledged publicly? Why were my contributions being systematically minimized in contexts where advancement decisions were made?" I began to realize that my expertise was being treated as a valuable resource for the company, while my potential for leadership was being overlooked in favor of colleagues who were better at self-promotion and relationship management. Brad's perspective on this situation revealed another layer of our growing disconnect. When I expressed frustration about the Pinnacle presentation, his response was dismissive in ways that I was beginning to recognize as a pattern. "You got credit for the technical work," he said. "That's what you're good at. Marcus is better with people, so it makes sense that he would handle the client-facing stuff." His comments stung because it revealed that he, like my colleagues, was beginning to see me as someone whose value lay in execution rather than vision, despite evidence that my strategic thinking was driving our most successful client acquisition. Even worse, he seemed to believe that this was the natural order of things, that my role should be to support more charismatic colleagues, rather than to develop my own leadership capability. The conversation that followed was one of our first real arguments about professional dynamics and gender roles. I tried to explain that my strategic thinking was being undervalued, that I was being pigeonholed into technical roles despite having broader capabilities, and that this pattern would limit my long-term career prospects if I didn't find ways to change. Brad's response revealed assumptions about gender and leadership that I hadn't fully recognized in him before. He suggested that I might be overthinking the situation, that maybe I was being too sensitive about recognition, and that perhaps I should focus on becoming really excellent at what I was already doing rather than trying to expand into areas where I might not be as naturally suited. "You're incredibly smart and analytical," he said, as if this were a consolation prize rather than a foundation for leadership. "That's your strength. Not everyone needs to be the face of the company." The implication was clear. He saw my value in terms of supporting other people's leadership rather than developing my own. This wasn't malicious, but it was limiting in ways that I was beginning to understand would affect not just our relationship but my entire sense of what was possible for my career. I started paying closer attention to how advancement actually worked at Phoenix Digital, studying the career trajectories of people who had moved into senior leadership roles. The patterns were revealing and discouraging. Almost without exception, the people who advanced to director and vice president levels were those who had established themselves as strategic thinkers and relationship builders rather than technical experts. This meant that no matter how good I became at data analysis, campaign optimization, or marketing automation, I would remain in supporting roles unless I found ways to position myself as someone who could drive business development and strategic vision. But every time I tried to expand into these areas, I encountered subtle resistance that suggested I was overstepping boundaries that others took for granted. The realization was both frustrating and motivating. If I wanted to advance beyond my current role, I would need to become more strategic about how I positioned my contributions, more assertive about seeking visibility, and more intentional about building the kinds of relationships that led to advancement opportunity. I couldn't simply rely on superior performance to speak for itself. I needed to learn how to advocate for myself in ways that felt foreign and sometimes uncomfortable. This shift in perspective was the beginning of a transformation that would affect every aspect of my professional life, but it was also the beginning of the end of my relationship with Brad, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable with my growing ambition and assertiveness. The 4th and 5th years at Phoenix Digital became a masterclass in building influence from within an organization that wasn't designed to recognize my particular combination of skills and ambition. I had accepted that waiting for recognition wasn't a strategy. I needed to create opportunities for advancement by making my contributions impossible to ignore or minimize. My approach became more systematic and strategic. Instead of simply executing excellent work and hoping it would be noticed, I began documenting everything, building relationships intentionally, and positioning myself as someone who understood, not just marketing tactics but business strategy in broader terms. If I was going to be seen as leadership material, I needed to demonstrate that I could think beyond campaign optimization and see the bigger picture of how marketing drove overall business success. The first major opportunity came when Robert Chen announced that Phoenix Digital would be pursuing B Corp certification, a designation that would differentiate us from competitors by demonstrating our commitment to social and environmental responsibility alongside financial performance. This was exactly the kind of strategic initiative that could showcase abilities beyond traditional marketing execution, and I volunteered to lead the certification process. B Corp certification required comprehensive evaluation of our business practices, from employee treatment and community engagement to environmental impact and corporate governance. The application process was intensive, requiring detailed documentation of policies, procedures, and measurable outcomes across dozens of different criteria. Most importantly, it required strategic thinking about how to align our business operations with values that would resonate with both employees and clients. I spent months researching B Corp requirements, analyzing our current practices, and developing implementation strategies that would not only meet certification standards, but also create competitive advantage in client acquisition and employee retention. The project required collaboration with every department, from human resources and finance to operations and client services, giving me visibility throughout the organization that my previous role had never provided. The process revealed skills I hadn't fully recognized in myself. I discovered that I was naturally good at project management on a large scale, capable of coordinating complex initiatives that involved multiple stakeholders with different priorities and perspectives. I was effective at translating abstract values into concrete policies and measurable outcomes, and I had an intuitive understanding of how operational changes could create strategic advantage. More importantly, the B Corp project gave me regular access to Robert Chen and other senior leaders in contexts where we were discussing business strategy rather than campaign detail. These conversations revealed that my analytical approach and attention to detail were valuable not just for marketing optimization, but for organizational development and strategic planning at the highest level. The certification process took 8 months and required changes to our hiring practices, vendor relationships, employee benefits, and community engagement initiatives. I developed new policies for remote work and professional development, created partnerships with local nonprofits, and implemented environmental sustainability measures that reduced our operational costs while demonstrating our commitment to responsible business practices. When Phoenix Digital achieved B Corp certification, we became one of only 12 marketing agencies in Arizona to earn the designation, creating immediate differentiation in competitive pitches and attracting attention from clients who prioritized working with socially responsible partners. The certification also improved employee satisfaction and retention, as staff members felt more connected to an organization whose values aligned with their personal beliefs. Robert publicly credited me with leading the entire initiative, acknowledging that the certification had been achieved ahead of schedule and within budget due to my project management and strategic planning. For the first time in my career at Phoenix Digital, I was being recognized not just for technical expertise, but for leadership capability and strategic thinking. The success of the B Corp project led to additional opportunities that allowed me to demonstrate abilities beyond traditional marketing roles. I was asked to lead our client retention analysis, a comprehensive review of why certain clients remained loyal while others switched to competitors. This project required not just data analysis but strategic thinking about relationship management, service delivery, and long-term value creation. My research revealed that client retention correlated strongly with the quality of strategic consultation they received rather than just campaign performance. Clients who stayed with Phoenix Digital long-term were those who felt we understood their business challenges holistically and could provide insights that extended beyond marketing tactics to broader business strategy. This finding led to the development of what I called our Strategic Partnership Program, a service offering that positioned Phoenix Digital as a strategic advisor rather than just a campaign executive. The program included quarterly business reviews, industry analysis, competitive intelligence, and strategic planning support that helped clients make better decisions about everything from product development to market expansion. The Strategic Partnership Program became our most successful service offering, commanding premium pricing while creating deeper client relationships that were much more difficult for competitors to disrupt. Clients in the program showed 93% retention rates and increased their average spending with Phoenix Digital by 47% within the first year. Again, I was recognized for developing an innovative approach that created measurable business value, but the recognition felt different this time. Instead of being praised for supporting other people's vision, I was being acknowledged as someone who could develop strategic initiatives independently and execute them successfully without significant oversight or support. The success of these projects was changing how I was perceived within the company, but it was also creating tension in my relationship with Brad that was becoming impossible to ignore. As my professional responsibilities expanded and my industry recognition grew, the dynamic between us was shifting in ways that neither of us had anticipated when we'd first started dating. Brad's own career at Morrison Financial was progressing steadily but not spectacularly. He had been promoted to Senior Client Relations Specialist, which came with better compensation and more prestigious clients, but his role remained fundamentally similar to what he'd been doing since he started there. He was good at relationship management and enjoyed the social aspects of financial services, but he wasn't developing the kind of specialized expertise or strategic thinking that would position him for senior leadership roles. The disparity in our career trajectories was becoming a source of friction that manifested in subtle but persistent ways. Brad would make comments about my obsession with work when I'd spend evenings researching industry trends or preparing for strategic planning meetings. He'd dismiss my excitement about new projects as corporate ladder climbing, and suggest that I was losing perspective about what really mattered in life. More troubling, he began undermining my confidence in ways that I didn't fully recognize at the time. When I'd share news about professional achievements or opportunities, his responses were often qualified or deflating. "That's great, but don't let it go to your head," he'd say, or "just remember that most of these corporate initiatives fail anyway." His comments were subtle enough that they could be interpreted as attempts to keep me grounded or manage my expectations, but their cumulative effect was to diminish my enthusiasm for professional growth and make me question whether my ambitions were reasonable or healthy. The most revealing conversation came after I'd been invited to speak at the Arizona Marketing Association's annual conference about the Strategic Partnership Program and its impact on client retention. This was a significant honor, positioning me as a thought leader within the local marketing community and creating visibility that could lead to opportunities beyond Phoenix Digital. When I told Brad about the speaking invitation, his response was immediately negative. "Why would you want to do that?" he asked. "It's just going to be a bunch of marketing people talking about things that don't really matter to anyone outside your industry." I tried to explain the significance of the invitation, how it represented recognition of my expertise and could create opportunities for consulting or board positions in the future. But Brad seemed more focused on the time commitment and the potential for what he called getting too caught up in your own hype. "You're already working too much," he said. "Now you want to spend weekends preparing presentations and networking with people who are just going to try to use you for their own advancement." His perspective revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of professional networking and career development, but more importantly, it showed that he was uncomfortable with my growing visibility and recognition within my industry. He seemed to prefer the version of me that had been struggling for recognition rather than the version that was beginning to receive it. The conference presentation was a huge success, leading to consulting inquiries, board nominations, and speaking invitations from other industry organizations. I was beginning to develop a reputation that extended beyond Phoenix Digital, creating opportunities for career advancement that I had never imagined possible when I'd started as a junior account coordinator. But the success was creating distance between Brad and me that felt increasingly unbridgeable. He was uncomfortable with my professional ambitions, dismissive of my achievements, and seemingly threatened by my growing independence and confidence. I was becoming someone he didn't recognize or particularly like, while he was remaining someone whose limitations I was beginning to see more clearly. The relationship was deteriorating, but I was too focused on professional growth to fully acknowledge how serious the problems had become. I convinced myself that the tension was temporary, that once Brad found his own path to advancement and recognition, he would be more supportive of my career development. I didn't realize that the foundation for our eventual divorce was being built during these years of professional growth, or that Brad's discomfort with my success would eventually manifest in ways far more destructive than subtle criticism and emotional withdrawal. By my 6th year at Phoenix Digital, the disconnect between my contributions and my official recognition had become a chasm that was impossible to ignore, even as I continued to tell myself that patience and persistence would eventually bridge the gap. I had developed proprietary methodologies that were driving our most successful campaigns, created service offerings that had become significant revenue streams, and established industry recognition that brought credibility to everything Phoenix Digital proposed to client. Yet I remained in what was essentially an elevated coordinator role, with increased responsibilities but without the title, compensation, or decision-making authority that reflected my actual impact on the company's success. Meanwhile, colleagues who had joined the company after me were being promoted to director and senior management positions, often based on their ability to present and sell the strategies and systems I had developed. The most frustrating example was the promotion of Marcus Williams to marketing director, a position that involved overseeing the strategic direction of our largest client account. Marcus was undeniably talented at client relationship management and had a natural ability to communicate complex strategies in accessible, compelling ways. But the strategies he was now responsible for directing were largely based on frameworks and methodologies I had spent years developing and refining. The promotion was announced during our quarterly all-hands meeting, with Robert Chen praising Marcus for his innovative thinking and strategic vision while outlining his new responsibilities for business development and client strategy. I sat in the audience listening to descriptions of duties that closely matched the work I had been doing informally for the past 2 years, watching someone else receive formal authority over processes I had created. After the meeting, several colleagues approached me with expressions of sympathy and confusion that confirmed what I already knew. The promotion was as surprising to them as it was disappointing to me. "I thought for sure you'd get that position," Sarah Chen told me. "Your strategic work is what made most of those client successes possible." The recognition from my peers was gratifying but also highlighted the absurdity of the situation. If everyone understood my contributions and capabilities, why wasn't that understanding reflected in advancement decisions? What was I missing about how promotion and recognition actually worked in corporate environments? I requested a meeting with Robert to discuss my career trajectory and understand what I needed to do to be considered for senior leadership roles. The conversation was polite but revealing in ways that I didn't fully appreciate at the time. Robert acknowledged my excellent work and strategic thinking, praising my analytical capabilities and attention to detail in terms that felt more like appreciation for a valuable employee than recognition of leadership potential. "You're absolutely crucial to our success," he told me. "Your research and analysis provide the foundation for everything we do with major clients. But leadership roles require a different set of skills, more focus on vision and relationship building rather than execution and implementation." The feedback was frustrating because it suggested that my strategic thinking was being categorized as execution rather than vision, and my relationship building with clients was being overlooked in favor of internal networking and presentation skills. I was apparently excellent at developing strategies but not perceived as someone who could lead strategic initiatives, despite having done exactly that with the B Corp certification and strategic partnership program. The conversation made me realize that I was being evaluated according to criteria that weren't clearly defined or consistently applied. The distinction between strategic thinking and visionary leadership seemed arbitrary, based more on style and presentation than on actual results or capability. But understanding the problem didn't immediately suggest solutions, particularly when the evaluation criteria appeared to favor qualities that were more naturally associated with traditional masculine leadership style. I decided to focus on building the specific skills and visibility that seemed to be missing from my profile. I enrolled in executive leadership programs, joined industry boards, and began writing articles for marketing publications about strategic approaches to client retention and business development. I was determined to position myself as someone who could think strategically about business challenges beyond marketing tactics. The additional commitments were time-consuming and expensive, requiring evenings and weekends that I had previously devoted to personal life and relationship maintenance. Brad was increasingly vocal in his criticism of what he called my never-ending quest for recognition, suggesting that I was becoming obsessed with advancement at the expense of everything else that mattered. "You already have a good job," he would say when I'd explain why I was attending another networking event or working on another article. "Why can't you just be satisfied with what you've accomplished? Not everyone needs to be a CEO." His comments revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of professional ambition and career development. I wasn't pursuing advancement for its own sake. I was trying to reach a level where my contributions would be recognized appropriately and where I would have the authority to implement the strategic vision I had been developing for years. I wanted to lead rather than just support other people's leadership. But Brad interpreted my ambition as dissatisfaction with our life together, as if professional growth represented a rejection of the relationship and lifestyle we had built. He seemed to believe that my desire for advancement implied that what we had wasn't enough for me, when in reality I was trying to become the best version of myself professionally, so that I could contribute more meaningfully to both our relationship and my career. The tension was affecting every aspect of our relationship, from daily conversations to long-term planning. When we talked about buying a house, Brad would make comments about how my unpredictable work schedule would make it difficult to maintain a home properly. When we discussed starting a family, he would suggest that my career obsession indicated I wasn't ready for the responsibilities of parenthood. These conversations were becoming increasingly painful because they revealed that Brad saw my professional development as a threat to our relationship rather than an asset that could benefit both of us. He seemed to prefer the version of me that had been struggling for recognition, when I had more time for relationship maintenance and was less confident about my own capabilities and work. The breaking point in our relationship came not through a dramatic confrontation but through a gradual realization that we had fundamentally different visions for what our life together should look like. Brad wanted a partner who would prioritize relationship and lifestyle over professional development, while I was becoming someone who saw career advancement as essential to personal fulfillment and long-term security. The divorce process was emotionally exhausting but not particularly acrimonious, at least initially. We had accumulated modest assets during our 7 years together, and the division was relatively straightforward. Brad kept the car, I kept the retirement savings, and we split the furniture and household items without significant disagreement. What I didn't anticipate was how much the divorce would affect my professional life, both in terms of emotional energy and practical consideration. The stress of relationship dissolution was affecting my performance at work just as I was trying to position myself for advancement opportunity. I was distracted during client meetings, less creative in strategic planning sessions, and generally operating at a lower level than I had maintained for years. More importantly, I was questioning fundamental assumptions about what I wanted from life, and whether the professional ambitions I had been pursuing were worth the personal costs they seemed to require. Maybe Brad had been right that I was becoming too focused on career advancement at the expense of other values and relationships. But even as I questioned my priorities, I couldn't ignore the reality that my professional development had given me the financial independence and confidence that allowed me to end a relationship that wasn't serving either of us well. If I had remained in the supporting role that Brad seemed to prefer, I might have felt trapped in a marriage that was limiting my growth and potential. The divorce was finalized 6 months after we had separated, during what should have been one of the most successful periods of my career. I had just completed a major campaign for Southwestern Health Systems that had exceeded all performance benchmarks and was being used as a case study for healthcare marketing effectiveness. I was receiving recognition from industry publications and speaking requests from conferences across the region, but the personal upheaval was overshadowing professional success in ways that made it difficult to fully appreciate the achievements I had worked so hard to accomplish. I was succeeding professionally while failing personally, which felt like a fundamental contradiction that I didn't know how to resolve. I threw myself into work with even more intensity, partly to distract from the emotional challenges of starting over personally and partly because I was beginning to understand that professional success might be the foundation for personal fulfillment, rather than an obstacle to it. If I could achieve the recognition and authority I had been pursuing, maybe I could create a life that integrated career satisfaction with personal happiness more successfully than my marriage had. The year following my divorce was a period of intense focus and professional growth that would set the stage for everything that followed. I was becoming someone who understood her own worth and was willing to advocate for appropriate recognition, but I was also becoming someone whose success would threaten people who preferred the previous version of me that had been easier to control and diminish. 18 months after my divorce was finalized, I thought I had successfully rebuilt both my personal and professional life. I was thriving in my expanded role at Phoenix Digital, had developed a strong network of industry colleagues who respected my expertise, and was finally receiving the kind of recognition that had eluded me for years. My personal life was quieter but more authentic, focused on friendships and professional relationships, rather than the emotional exhaustion that had characterized the final years of my marriage. I had heard through mutual friends that Brad had remarried quickly, less than a year after our divorce was final. The news wasn't particularly surprising or painful. I had moved on emotionally and was genuinely happy that he had found someone who might be a better match for the lifestyle and priorities he preferred. I wished him well and assumed that our paths would continue to diverge naturally with minimal overlap or interaction. That assumption proved to be catastrophically naive. The first sign that something unusual was happening came during a routine staff meeting when Robert Chen announced that Phoenix Digital would be hiring a new senior HR business partner to handle employee development, performance management, and organizational planning for our growing team. The position was being created to support our expansion into new markets and service areas, and would involve oversight of all senior-level performance evaluations and advancement decisions. We're excited to bring in someone with extensive experience in talent development and organizational psychology, Robert explained. Amanda Thompson will be joining us next month from Data Vision Solutions, where she led their HR transformation initiative. Thompson was Brad's new last name, but it's also a common surname that could belong to anyone. I didn't make any connection until Maria Santos, my closest colleague at Phoenix Digital, mentioned something that made my stomach drop. I looked up our new HR director on LinkedIn, Maria said casually during our weekly coffee meeting. She seems impressive, but she's pretty young for such a senior role, only 29, and this is her first HR leadership position. I guess Data Vision really valued her consulting background. 29 years old. Recently hired in a senior position despite limited direct experience. The details were starting to form a pattern that I desperately hoped was coincidental, but that felt increasingly ominous as I considered the implication. That evening, I did my own research into Amanda Thompson's background, hoping to confirm that my suspicions were unfounded. What I discovered instead was worse than I had imagined. Amanda's LinkedIn profile showed that she had indeed worked at Data Vision Solutions, but only for 8 months, in a junior HR generalist role rather than any kind of leadership position. Her previous experience was primarily in recruiting and administrative support, with no background in performance management, organizational development, or any of the other specialties Robert had mentioned during his announcement. More disturbing, her profile indicated that she had gotten married 8 months ago, which would place her wedding shortly after my divorce from Brad was finalized. The timeline was beginning to suggest a connection that I found both personally offensive and professionally alarming. I spent the weekend trying to decide how to handle the situation. If Amanda Thompson was indeed Brad's new wife, her hiring represented a conflict of interest that should have been disclosed during the interview process, but I had no direct evidence of the connection beyond circumstantial details and timeline coincidences that might not constitute proof of anything improper. I decided to wait until Amanda started working at Phoenix Digital before raising any concerns, hoping that direct interaction would either confirm or disprove my suspicions. If she was Brad's wife, I would need to address the conflict of interest through proper channels. If she wasn't, I would need to figure out how to work effectively with someone whose qualifications seemed questionable regardless of any personal connections. Amanda's first day at Phoenix Digital confirmed my worst fears within minutes of her introduction to the senior staff. She was attractive, confident, and articulate in exactly the way that Brad found appealing in women. More importantly, she was wearing a wedding ring with an inscription that I recognized because I had helped Brad choose the design for the engagement ring he had given me years earlier. The confirmation that Phoenix Digital had hired my ex-husband's wife as the person responsible for my performance evaluation felt like a betrayal that went beyond personal offense to to represent a fundamental breakdown of professional ethics and judgment. How had Robert and the hiring committee failed to identify this conflict of interest? Had Amanda disclosed her connection to me during the interview process? Had Brad somehow influenced her application or hiring? I maintained professional composure during Amanda's introduction and orientation meetings, but internally I was struggling with a combination of anger, confusion, and strategic calculation. This wasn't just an awkward personal situation, it was a direct threat to my career advancement and job security. Amanda would be responsible for evaluating my performance, making recommendations about my compensation and promotion eligibility, and potentially influencing decisions about my future at Phoenix Digital. The absurdity of the situation was compounded by the broader context of my professional development over the past 2 years. I had been working systematically to position myself for advancement to director level, building industry recognition and expanding my responsibilities in preparation for the next phase of my career. Now I would be evaluated by someone with questionable qualifications, whose personal relationship with my ex-husband created obvious incentives for bias and retaliation. During Amanda's first week, I observed her interactions with other staff members and her approach to understanding Phoenix Digital's organizational structure and culture. What I saw was someone who was intelligent and personable but clearly unprepared for the complexity of her role. She asked basic questions about performance management systems, seemed unfamiliar with industry-standard HR practices, and relied heavily on generic consulting frameworks rather than developing understanding of our specific organizational needs. More concerning, I noticed that she was spending considerable time reviewing personnel files and asking detailed questions about employee performance history, advancement timelines, and compensation structure. While this could be interpreted as thorough preparation for her new role, it also suggested that she was gathering information that could be used to make decisions based on personal bias rather than objective evaluation criteria. The breaking point came 2 weeks after Amanda's arrival, when Robert called me into his office for what he described as a routine discussion about my performance review cycle and advancement timeline. What should have been a positive conversation about my continued growth and increasing responsibilities became instead a devastating revelation about how dramatically my professional situation had changed. "Jessica," Robert began, "I wanted to give you a heads up that Amanda will be conducting your annual performance review this year. She's taking over all senior-level evaluations as part of her integration into the HR leadership role." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I had been anticipating this possibility since Amanda's hiring had been announced. Hearing it confirmed felt like watching a trap close around me, orchestrated by people who either didn't understand or didn't care about the ethical implications of their decision. "Robert," I said carefully, "I need to disclose something that might create a conflict of interest in that arrangement." I explained the situation as objectively as possible, outlining my previous marriage to Brad Thompson and his current marriage to Amanda, while emphasizing that I wanted to handle the situation professionally and appropriately rather than create unnecessary drama or complication. Robert's response was dismissive in a way that shocked me with its casual disregard for obvious ethical concerns. "I'm sure you're both professional enough to handle this appropriately," he said. "Amanda comes with excellent recommendations, and I trust her judgment about employee performance and development needs." His response revealed either stunning naivety about potential conflicts of interest or deliberate indifference to my concerns about fair treatment and objective evaluation. Either way, it became clear that I wouldn't receive support from senior leadership in addressing the situation through normal channels. "I understand your concern," Robert continued, "but I don't think personal history should prevent Amanda from doing her job effectively. If there are any issues with the evaluation process, we can address them afterward." The conversation felt surreal, like Robert was dismissing obvious professional ethics in favor of administrative convenience. The suggestion that we could address issues afterward implied that he was willing to allow a potentially biased evaluation to proceed and deal with consequences only if problems became undeniable after the fact. I left Robert's office understanding that I was on my own in dealing with a situation that threatened everything I had worked to build over the past 8 years. Amanda would be evaluating my performance with obvious personal incentives to undermine my success, and senior leadership was either unwilling or unable to recognize the fundamental unfairness of this arrangement. That night, I sat in my apartment trying to process the reality that my ex-husband had somehow managed to insert his new wife into a position where she could sabotage my career with institutional support and protection. The transformation of Phoenix Digital during my fourth and fifth years felt like watching a company evolve in fast motion. With new clients, expanded services, and growing reputation that positioned us as one of the premier marketing agencies in the Southwest. What made this growth particularly satisfying was knowing that my strategic initiatives had been instrumental in driving the expansion, even if my contributions weren't always visible to outside observers. The success of our B Corp certification had opened doors to clients who prioritized working with socially responsible partners, leading to contracts with 3 major healthcare systems, 2 sustainable technology companies, and a renewable energy cooperative that became one of our largest accounts. These clients were attracted not just to our marketing capabilities, but to our demonstrated commitment to values-driven business practices. Building on this momentum, I proposed what would become our most ambitious strategic initiative: the development of a proprietary client intelligence platform that would revolutionize how we approached campaign development and performance optimization. The platform would integrate data from multiple sources, including social media monitoring, customer behavior analytics, market research, and competitive intelligence to create comprehensive profiles that could predict consumer response to different marketing approaches with unprecedented accuracy. The project required significant investment in technology infrastructure, data analysis tools, and specialized personnel, but I was convinced that it would create sustainable competitive advantages that could differentiate Phoenix Digital from larger agencies with more resources, but less sophisticated analytical capability. Robert was initially skeptical about the cost and complexity of the initiative, but I developed a detailed business case that demonstrated how the platform could increase campaign effectiveness while reducing client acquisition costs. The development process took 18 months and required collaboration with software developers, data scientists, and marketing automation specialists who could translate my strategic vision into functional technology. I became the de facto project manager for the entire initiative, coordinating between technical teams and client services to ensure that the platform would meet real-world operational needs rather than just theoretical capability. The technical complexity was challenging, but the most difficult aspect of the project was convincing colleagues that the investment was worthwhile. Many of the senior account managers were comfortable with existing campaign development processes and worried that new technology would complicate client relationships or require skills they weren't prepared to develop. Marcus Williams was particularly resistant to the platform, arguing that client relationships were built on trust and personal connection rather than data analysis and predictive modeling. Clients want to work with people who understand their business intuitively, he would say during strategy meetings. They don't want to feel like they're being managed by algorithms. His perspective revealed a fundamental understanding of how data analytics could enhance rather than replace relationship building. The platform wasn't designed to eliminate human judgment and creativity. It was intended to provide insights that would make our strategic recommendations more accurate and our campaign results more predictable. Better data would lead to better decisions, which would ultimately strengthen client relationships by delivering superior results. The resistance from colleagues was frustrating but not unexpected. Change management in professional environments often requires overcoming skepticism from people who have been successful using existing approaches and worry that new methods might threaten their expertise or job security. I spent considerable time explaining how the platform would support rather than replace their client relationship skills, emphasizing that better data would make them more effective at strategic consultation. When the platform launched, the results exceeded even my optimistic projection. Campaign performance improved by an average of 43% across all client accounts, with particularly dramatic improvements in audience targeting, message optimization, and conversion rate prediction. Clients were amazed by our ability to anticipate market trends and adjust strategies proactively, rather than reactively. More importantly, the platform created new revenue opportunities through consulting services that extended beyond traditional marketing campaigns. Clients began asking us to analyze their overall business strategy, evaluate potential market opportunities, and provide competitive intelligence that informed decisions about product development, pricing, and market expansion. The success of the client intelligence platform established Phoenix Digital as a technology leader within the marketing industry, attracting attention from trade publications, conference organizers, and potential clients who were interested in working with an agency that could provide both creative excellence and analytical sophistication. I was invited to speak at industry conferences about the intersection of data science and marketing strategy, positioning both myself and Phoenix Digital as innovators in an increasingly competitive field. Robert was effusive in his praise for the platform's success, acknowledging that my vision and project management had created what he called a game-changing competitive advantage that would benefit the company for years to come. The recognition felt validating after months of skepticism and resistance from colleagues who had questioned whether the investment was worthwhile. But the success of the platform also highlighted the ongoing disconnect between my contributions and my official recognition within the company hierarchy. While I was being acknowledged as the architect of Phoenix Digital's most innovative strategic initiative, I remained in what was essentially an enhanced coordinator role without formal authority over the technologies and processes I had created. This became particularly apparent when Robert announced the formation of a new strategic innovation department that would oversee the client intelligence platform and other technology initiatives. The department would be led by a newly created Director of Strategic Innovation position, which would involve managing the technical teams, expanding the platform's capabilities, and developing additional tools that could further differentiate Phoenix Digital from competitors. I assumed that I would be offered the director position, given that I had conceived, developed, and implemented the platform that would be the department's primary focus. My expertise with the technology was unmatched within the company, and I had demonstrated the project management and strategic thinking skills necessary to lead continued innovation efforts. Instead, Robert offered the position to David Kumar, a recently hired senior consultant who had impressive credentials in business strategy and technology implementation, but no experience with our specific platform or client base. David had an MBA from a prestigious program and had worked for a major consulting firm before joining Phoenix Digital, qualifications that apparently outweighed my intimate knowledge of the systems and relationships that would be central to the new department's success. The decision was devastating, not just because I had been overlooked for a position I was uniquely qualified to fill, but because it revealed how my contributions were being systematically undervalued, despite their obvious impact on the company's success. I had built the foundation for an entire new business line, only to watch someone else be given authority over its continued development. Robert's explanation for the decision was diplomatically worded, but revealed assumptions about leadership and expertise that reflected broader biases about who was suited for senior management roles. David brings a strategic perspective and management experience that will be valuable as we scale the innovation department, he told me during a private meeting. Your technical knowledge and analytical skills will be crucial to supporting his leadership and helping him understand the platform's capability. The language was subtle, but unmistakable. I was being positioned as a technical expert who would support someone else's leadership rather than as someone who could provide leadership myself. My deep understanding of the technology and client applications was being characterized as valuable support rather than foundational expertise that should inform strategic direction. The conversation was a turning point in my understanding of how advancement actually worked at Phoenix Digital and probably in most corporate environments. Excellence in execution and technical innovation was valued but not considered sufficient for leadership roles, which were apparently reserved for people who presented the right combination of credentials, communication style, and demographic characteristics that matched traditional expectations about executive presence. I accepted the outcome gracefully, at least externally, and committed to working effectively with David to ensure the continued success of the platform and the new department. But internally, I was grappling with the realization that my career advancement might require either changing how I presented my capabilities or finding opportunities with organizations that valued my particular combination of strategic thinking and technical expertise. The experience was also affecting my personal life in ways that I was only beginning to recognize. The intensity of the platform development project, combined with the disappointment of being overlooked for the director position, was consuming emotional energy that I had little left for relationships or activities outside of work. I was becoming someone whose identity was increasingly defined by professional achievement, partly because that was where I felt most competent and valued. My social life had narrowed to primarily work-related networking and professional development activities. While these relationships were meaningful and beneficial for career advancement, they weren't providing the emotional support and personal connection that I needed to maintain perspective and balance. I was succeeding professionally while struggling personally, a pattern that would have long-term consequences for both my career decisions and my relationship choices. The period following the director position disappointment was characterized by intense focus on expanding my expertise and industry recognition, driven partly by genuine interest in professional development and partly by determination to position myself for opportunities that would appropriately recognize my capability. If Phoenix Digital wasn't ready to acknowledge my leadership potential, I would build credentials that would be undeniable in future advancement decisions. I enrolled in executive education programs at prestigious business schools, obtained certifications in emerging areas like artificial intelligence and marketing automation, and began writing articles for industry publications about the intersection of technology and marketing strategy. I was building a professional brand that extended beyond Phoenix Digital, creating opportunities for consulting, speaking, and eventually career advancement that wouldn't depend entirely on internal recognition and promotion process. This strategy was time-consuming and expensive, requiring evenings and weekends that I had previously devoted to personal relationships and leisure activity. The investment was paying off in terms of industry recognition and professional opportunities, but it was also contributing to the social isolation and work-life imbalance that would make me vulnerable to the personal relationships that were developing in my life. During this period of intense professional focus, I began dating again after the emotional recovery from my divorce had progressed sufficiently to allow for new relationships. The dating process was challenging, partly because my career demands left limited time for relationship development, and partly because my professional success seemed to intimidate or threaten some potential partners. I met Brad Thompson at a professional networking event hosted by the Phoenix Chamber of Commerce, where he was representing Morrison Financial and I was speaking about the role of data analytics in strategic business planning. He was charming, articulate, and genuinely interested in my work in ways that felt refreshing after months of dating men who seemed uncomfortable with my career achievement. Brad appeared to appreciate my ambition and expertise, asking thoughtful questions about my projects and expressing admiration for what I had accomplished at Phoenix Digital. He seemed secure enough in his own career to be supportive of my professional goals rather than threatened by them, a quality that felt rare and valuable in the dating environment I had been navigating. Our relationship developed quickly, fueled by shared interests in business strategy, professional development, and lifestyle aspirations that seemed compatible with both of our career trajectories. Brad was successful in financial services, earning good income and building a client base that provided both financial security and professional satisfaction. We seemed to complement each other well, with his relationship skills balancing my analytical strengths, and his extroverted nature providing social connections that my work-focused lifestyle had neglected. Within 6 months we were discussing moving in together, and within a year we were in. The relationship felt like a natural progression that would enhance both of our lives, while supporting our individual professional goals. I was optimistic that I had found a partner who would encourage my continued growth while building a stable foundation for long-term personal happiness. Looking back, I can see warning signs that I missed or dismissed at the time, subtle indications that Brad's support for my career was conditional and that his comfort with my success would diminish as my achievements exceeded his own. But during the early stages of our relationship, I was focused on the positive aspects of having a partner who seemed to understand and appreciate my professional ambition. The relationship provided emotional support and personal connection that had been missing from my life during the intensive platform development period, helping me maintain better balance between career focus and personal fulfillment. I was succeeding both professionally and personally for the first time in years, feeling like I had finally figured out how to integrate different aspects of my life successfully. This sense of balance and achievement would prove to be temporary, as the challenges of building a career in environments that systematically undervalued my contributions would eventually create stress and conflict that would test every aspect of my life, including my relationship with Brad. The 7th year at Phoenix Digital brought a series of achievements that should have represented the culmination of everything I had been working toward since joining the company. The client intelligence platform had become our signature offering, generating over 40% of our annual revenue and attracting attention from potential acquisition partners who saw Phoenix Digital as an innovative leader in marketing technology. My industry recognition had reached new heights, with speaking invitations from national conferences, consulting requests from Fortune 500 companies, and mentions in trade publications as one of the rising stars transforming how marketing agencies approached client strategy. I had been nominated for the Arizona Technology Council's Innovation Award and had been asked to serve on the advisory board for the Marketing Analytics Institute. Yet despite these external validations of my expertise and strategic thinking, my position within Phoenix Digital remained essentially unchanged from what it had been 3 years earlier. I had accumulated more responsibilities, gained access to more high-level client interactions, and received incremental salary increases, but I lacked the formal authority and recognition that would reflect my actual contributions to the company's success. The disconnect became impossible to ignore when Phoenix Digital announced its most significant expansion in company history, the opening of satellite offices in Denver and Austin, along with the launch of 3 new service lines that would position us as a full-service business consulting firm rather than just a marketing agent. The expansion was based entirely on capabilities and reputation that I had been instrumental in developing, yet I was not included in the senior leadership team that would oversee the growth initiative. Instead, the leadership team consisted of Robert Chen, Marcus Williams as Vice President of Client Services, David Kumar as Director of Strategic Innovation, and 2 new hires brought in specifically for the expansion, Jennifer Walsh as Director of Operations and Michael Rodriguez as Director of Business Development. All of these positions carried equity stakes in the expanding company and decision-making authority over strategic direction that would shape Phoenix Digital's future for decades. My exclusion from this leadership team was particularly frustrating because the expansion strategy relied heavily on the client intelligence platform and data-driven consulting services that I had conceived and developed. The Denver and Austin offices would be built around these capabilities, and the new service lines would depend on methodologies and client relationships that I had been nurturing for years. When I requested a meeting with Robert to discuss my role in the expansion and my career advancement within the company, his response revealed assumptions about leadership and value that I found both disappointing and illuminating. He acknowledged my technical expertise and strategic contributions, while simultaneously categorizing them as support functions rather than leadership capabilities. "You're absolutely essential to our success," Robert told me during our meeting. "The platform you developed is the foundation for everything we're building, and your analytical approach is what sets us apart from competitors. But the expansion requires people who can manage teams, build new client relationships, and represent the company to investors and potential partners." His explanation implied that my strategic thinking and technical innovation weren't sufficient qualifications for senior leadership, despite the fact that these capabilities had been central to Phoenix Digital's growth and competitive positioning. He seemed to view leadership as primarily about presentation and relationship management, rather than the vision and execution that had actually driven the company's success. More troubling, Robert's comments suggested that he saw my value primarily in terms of maintaining and optimizing existing systems, rather than developing new strategies and opportunities. "We need you focused on continuing to improve the platform and supporting the client services team," he said. "That's where your expertise can have the most impact." The conversation made clear that I was being pigeonholed into a technical specialist role, valued for my ability to solve complex problems and deliver exceptional results, but not considered suitable for the broader strategic and management responsibilities that came with senior leadership positions. My contributions were being characterized as crucial but narrow, essential for execution, but not relevant to vision and direction. This characterization was particularly frustrating because it ignored the business development and relationship building I had been doing for years. Many of our most valuable clients had been attracted to Phoenix Digital specifically because of my strategic consultation and the insights provided by the platform I had developed. I had been building and managing client relationships at the highest levels, just not in ways that fit traditional patterns of sales and account management. The meeting ended with Robert offering me a promotion to senior strategic analyst, a newly created position that would involve oversight of the client intelligence platform and coordination with the various service lines that depended on data analysis and market research. The title was more prestigious than my current role, and the compensation increase was substantial, but the position lacked the decision-making authority and equity participation that would reflect my actual contributions to the company's value. I accepted the promotion gracefully, understanding that it represented progress even if it fell short of what I believed I deserved. But privately, I was beginning to question whether Phoenix Digital would ever recognize my leadership potential or whether I needed to consider opportunities with organizations that might be more open to my particular combination of technical expertise and strategic thinking. The decision to accept the senior strategic analyst role rather than pursuing external opportunities was influenced partly by my relationship with Brad, which had become a significant factor in my career decision-making. We had been married for 2 years and were discussing starting a family, which made job stability and work-life balance more important considerations than they had been when I was focused primarily on career advancement. Brad was supportive of my promotion, but I noticed that his enthusiasm seemed greater for the salary increase than for the recognition of my professional capability. He focused on how the additional income would help us qualify for a better mortgage and afford the lifestyle upgrades we had been considering, rather than on what the advancement meant for my long-term career prospect. His perspective on my career had shifted subtly over the course of our relationship, from initial admiration for my achievements to acceptance of my success as beneficial for our shared goals rather than inherently valuable. He seemed more comfortable when my professional accomplishments translated directly to improvements in our personal circumstances than when they represented abstract recognition or industry credibility. This shift in attitude became more apparent as my industry profile continued to grow despite my frustrations with advancement at Phoenix Digital. When I was invited to keynote the National Marketing Technology Conference, Brad's response was lukewarm despite the significant honor it represented. "That's great," he said, "but I hope it won't require too much travel. We're trying to maintain better work-life balance." His comment revealed that he was beginning to see my professional success as competing with our relationship rather than enhancing. The speaking engagements, consulting projects, and industry involvement that were building my reputation and creating opportunities for future advancement were being perceived as distractions from our marriage and impediments to the domestic stability he preferred. The tension was becoming more noticeable in daily conversations about work and career goals. When I would share excitement about new projects or industry recognition, Brad's responses were often qualified with concerns about time commitment, travel requirements, or stress level. He seemed to want me to be successful enough to contribute to our financial goals, but not so ambitious that my career would interfere with his vision of our life together. This dynamic was affecting my enthusiasm for professional development and making me question whether my career ambitions were reasonable or healthy for someone who was married and planning to start a family. Maybe Brad was right that I was becoming too focused on advancement at the expense of other important aspects of life. The internal conflict was exhausting, creating stress that affected both my work performance and my personal relationship. I was succeeding professionally while struggling with self-doubt about whether my priorities were appropriate for someone in my personal circumstance. The recognition gap at Phoenix Digital was painful, but the growing distance in my marriage was more concerning because it threatened the foundation of personal happiness that I had thought would support my professional growth. I began working with a career coach to help clarify my long-term goals and develop strategies for advancement that wouldn't require sacrificing personal relationships or lifestyle preferences. The coaching process was valuable for understanding my strengths and developing negotiation skills, but it also highlighted the complexity of navigating career development as a woman whose personal and professional identities were increasingly intertwined. The coach helped me recognize that my frustration with Phoenix Digital wasn't just about recognition or compensation, but about being valued for my actual contributions, rather than being limited by other people's assumptions about my capabilities and appropriate role. The issue wasn't necessarily that I needed to change companies, but that I needed to become more strategic about advocating for myself and positioning my value in ways that would be recognized by decision makers. This insight led to a more systematic approach to documenting and presenting my contributions, building internal relationships with people who could influence advancement decisions, and developing the presentation and communication skills that seemed to be missing from my professional profile. I was determined to bridge the recognition gap through better self-advocacy, rather than simply waiting for my work to speak for itself. The effort was beginning to show results when external circumstances beyond my control would create challenges that threatened everything I had built at Phoenix Digital and forced me to confront fundamental questions about my career, my merit, and my understanding of my own worth in professional environments that weren't designed to recognize or reward my particular combination of talents and ambitions. The 8th year at Phoenix Digital began with what appeared to be the breakthrough I had been working toward since joining the company. Robert Chen called me into his office in January to discuss what he described as exciting new opportunities that would allow me to expand my role and take on greater strategic responsibilities within the organization. The conversation initially felt like validation of everything I had been advocating for during the previous year of focused self-promotion and relationship building. Robert acknowledged that my contributions had been instrumental in Phoenix Digital's success and that the client intelligence platform had become the cornerstone of our competitive advantage. He spoke about the company's continued growth and the need for senior leadership that could drive innovation while maintaining the analytical rigor that had become our signature strength. "We're creating a new position that would be perfect for your skill set and experience," Robert told, Director of Strategic Analytics, with oversight of all data-driven initiatives and direct responsibility for expanding our consulting services. It would involve equity participation and a seat on the senior leadership team. The opportunity sounded like everything I had been hoping for. The recognition and authority that would finally align my formal position with my actual contributions to the company. I was excited about the possibility of leading a team, developing new service offerings, and having real influence over Phoenix Digital's strategic direction. But as Robert continued explaining the position and timeline, subtle details began to suggest that the opportunity might not be as straightforward as it initially appeared. The Director of Strategic Analytics role was contingent on the successful completion of our upcoming performance review cycle, which would evaluate all senior staff members and determine advancement eligibility for the next fiscal year. "I want to be transparent with you, Roberts. This promotion would represent a significant investment in your future with the company, and we need to ensure that all aspects of your performance and leadership potential are thoroughly evaluated before making such an important decision." The language seemed unnecessarily cautious for someone whose contributions had been consistently excellent and whose capabilities had been demonstrated through years of successful project leadership. I wondered why a formal performance review was necessary to confirm what should have been obvious from my track record and current responsibilities. My questions about the evaluation process led to information that initially seemed routine, but would prove to be devastating. Robert explained that Phoenix Digital had recently hired a new senior HR business partner who would be conducting all senior-level performance reviews as part of her integration into the leadership team. Amanda Thompson comes to us from Data Vision Solutions with excellent credentials in organizational psychology and talent development. Roberts. She'll be conducting comprehensive evaluations that will help us make informed decisions about advancement and leadership development for all our senior staff. The name Amanda Thompson meant nothing to me at the time, just another HR professional hired to support Phoenix Digital's continued growth and expansion. I had no reason to suspect that this routine personnel decision would become the catalyst for the most challenging period of my professional life. Amanda's first day at Phoenix Digital was scheduled for the following Monday, and Robert arranged for me to meet with her during her initial week to discuss the performance review process and timeline. I was optimistic about the meeting, viewing it as an opportunity to build a positive relationship with someone who would be evaluating my contributions and potential for advance. When Amanda arrived for our scheduled meeting, I immediately recognized something familiar about her appearance and mannerisms, though I couldn't place exactly what seemed recognizable. She was professionally dressed, articulate, and confident in ways that suggested extensive experience in corporate environments, despite appearing younger than I had expected for someone in such a senior HR role. Our conversation about the performance review process was cordial but revealed concerning gaps in her knowledge about industry standard evaluation practices and organizational development methodology. She asked basic questions about performance metrics and advancement criteria that suggested unfamiliarity with HR best practices, and her responses to my questions about her background were vague in ways that seemed evasive rather than appropriately confidential. More troubling, Amanda seemed unusually interested in my personal background and career history outside of Phoenix Digital. She asked detailed questions about my previous relationships, living situation, and family circumstances that seemed irrelevant to professional performance evaluation. When I asked about the relevance of these topics, she explained that holistic assessment required understanding employees' personal circumstances and how they might affect workplace performance and advancement potential. The explanation seemed plausible but felt uncomfortable, particularly given that these personal topics hadn't been part of previous performance reviews I had experienced. I answered her questions professionally, but made mental notes about the unusual focus on personal rather than professional factors. The meeting ended with Amanda scheduling follow-up sessions to review my project portfolios, client relationships, and strategic contributions over the past year. She also mentioned that she would be conducting interviews with colleagues and clients to gather 360-degree feedback about my performance and leadership potential. Over the following weeks, I began hearing from colleagues about their interactions with Amanda during the feedback gathering process. The conversations were apparently focused heavily on my interpersonal relationships, communication style, and what Amanda described as cultural fit within the organization. Several colleagues mentioned that Amanda had asked specific questions about my relationship with male colleagues, my responsiveness to feedback and criticism, and my attitudes toward authority and organizational hierarchy. These questions seemed designed to identify potential personality or behavioral issues, rather than to evaluate professional competence and strategic thinking. Maria Santos, my closest colleague at Phoenix Digital, expressed concern about the tone and focus of her interview with Amanda. She seemed more interested in finding problems than understanding your contributions, Maria told me. Most of her questions were about potential areas of difficulty rather than your achievements and capability. The feedback from colleagues was creating anxiety about the review process and raising questions about Amanda's objectivity and professional judgment. The evaluation seemed to be proceeding according to an agenda that had little to do with my actual performance and everything to do with finding justifications for predetermined conclusions. My concerns deepened when I discovered additional information about Amanda's background that raised serious questions about her qualifications and the circumstances of her hiring. Through casual networking conversations, I learned that her previous position at DataVision Solutions had lasted only 8 months, and had involved primarily administrative and recruiting support rather than strategic HR leadership. More significantly, I discovered through social media research that Amanda had recently gotten married, with wedding photos posted on her personal accounts showing a ceremony that had taken place just 6 months earlier. The timeline and circumstances were beginning to suggest connections that I found deeply troubling. The breakthrough in understanding came when I recognized the wedding ring Amanda was wearing during one of our meetings. The distinctive design was one I had helped select years earlier when I was engaged to Brad Thompson, my ex-husband who had remarried shortly after our divorce was finalized. The realization that Phoenix Digital had hired my ex-husband's wife to conduct my performance review felt like a betrayal that went beyond personal offense to represent a fundamental breakdown of professional ethics and corporate judgment. How had this conflict of interest not been identified during the hiring process? Had Amanda disclosed her connection to me? Had Brad somehow influenced her application or the evaluation process? The implications were staggering. Amanda had access to my personnel file, my career history, my compensation information, and confidential details about my professional relationships and strategic contribution. She was responsible for evaluating my performance, making recommendations about my advancement, and potentially influencing my future at Phoenix Digital in ways that could be devastating if she harbored personal resentment or vindictive intention. I immediately requested a meeting with Robert to disclose the conflict of interest and request that my performance review be conducted by someone without personal connections to my private life. I approached the conversation professionally, focusing on ethical concerns and corporate policies, rather than personal grievances or emotional reactions. Robert's response was disappointing and alarming in its casual dismissal of obvious ethical problems. "I'm sure you're both professional enough to handle this situation appropriately," he said. "Amanda comes with strong recommendations and has demonstrated excellent judgment in her initial weeks here." His refusal to acknowledge the severity of the conflict of interest suggested either stunning naivety about professional ethics, or deliberate indifference to my concerns about fair treatment and objective evaluation. The conversation made clear that I wouldn't receive support from senior leadership in addressing the situation through normal organizational channels. Personal history shouldn't prevent Amanda from conducting an objective evaluation, Robert continued. "If there are any issues with the review process, we can address them afterward." The suggestion that we could deal with problems afterward implied that Robert was willing to allow a potentially biased evaluation to proceed, and would only consider remedial action if the results proved to be obviously unfair or discriminatory. This approach put my career advancement and job security at risk while protecting the company's administrative convenience and Amanda's position. I left the meeting understanding that I was facing a threat to everything I had built over 8 years at Phoenix Digital, orchestrated by someone with personal motivations, for undermining my success and enabled by senior leadership that was either unable or unwilling to recognize the ethical implications of their decision. The situation required strategic thinking and careful documentation rather than emotional reactions or impulsive decisions. If I was going to protect my career and ensure fair treatment, I would need to build an irrefutable case for my contributions and value, while exposing the bias and conflicts of interest that threatened to destroy everything I had worked to achieve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.